First of all, let me introduce myself. I'm John Kane. My Mohawk name is Gargio. It means good woods. I'm from, my family is from Ganawage, which is a Mohawk territory up near Montreal. It's on this side of the river, I guess. Ganawage is a place that has born out of it a lot of strong native, but predominantly strong Mohawk activism. The unity flag, which people know as the warrior flag, was designed by Louis Hall, from Ganawage. He is one of those guys that I would consider a mentor. He's no longer with us, but you feel free to look up Louis Hall online. You'll see a lot of his artwork. You would see in some of what Louis Hall has done a style that became very, very popular after a fashion. It's a kind of unique style to his artwork. You can see it captured a little bit in the flag, but these things were designed in the 70s, so it goes back a ways. But anyway, that's the community that I'm from. I am married to an Oneida woman. I've got 3 children, so they are, by virtue of my wife, they are Oneida, they're a client. I've lived in Mohawk territory. I lived in Oneida. I've lived in or about Onondaga, and I for the last 15 plus years I've lived in Seneca territory, Cattaraugus specifically. I have been involved in. I would consider myself an activist. I've been involved in Native issues for a long time. I've been at the center of controversy. I went to prison for 2 years. Specifically standing up to some of the debacle that existed with the Oneida Nation when Mr. Ray Halbritter managed to get federally recognized. And so I have been through that. I'm not saying that as a function of street cred, I'm saying that as a function of full disclosure, I guess. So I do know my way through the U.S. judicial system, the federal system, and part of the state system, but and I've been through the Bureau of Prisons. I did time out of this one stint, I did time in Oklahoma, in Texas, in Pennsylvania, and that was just out of a 2-year stint. So that's how much they call it diesel therapy in the prison system. I even got to fly on what was pretty much dubbed as Con Air. It was an airplane that a whole plane filled with people shackled, hands and feet, and it's just an interesting experience. But I'll tell you, I didn't come out of that experience with my tail between my legs. I came out with probably just a strong resolve, if not stronger than when I went in. I'm not saying I came out an asshole. I mean, I really didn't. But I didn't come out with a chip on my shoulder. I just came out with a sense that this couldn't. You can't take a few lumps and then just tuck it away and pretend, okay, I did my part, now it's somebody else. I'm 53 years old. I'll be 54 next month. I've been doing this kind of. I've been doing what I do for a long time, and at a level where I've seen a lot of my friends, a lot of people that I've worked with, kind of drop off and burn out, or decide that the way we're approaching things isn't working, so they'll run for like a tribal council, or they'll try to get part of they decide, okay, this isn't working, I'm gonna go get a law degree or something like that, and which never kind of builds that same direction. So I've seen people drop by the wayside, and I've had people ask me, and I'll tell you, right now I do a 2-hour Native radio show every Sunday night from 9 to 11 on WWKB 1520 AM. It streams live. I do that every week. I do monthly appearances on the Martha Fast Horse show in Minneapolis, St. Paul. I'm a fairly frequent guest on Laura Woodstock Waterman's First Persons, or First Peoples, I guess it is, on also in that same market, but on a public radio station out there in Minneapolis, St. Paul. I'm a frequent guest and actually a guest host for Tiokas and Ghost Horse in New York on WBAI in New York City. I write a weekly column in the Two Row Times, and it's here, so you can take a look at it. It's, not only is it in print, but it's online. So I do all this stuff, and actually deliver the paper. So beyond all that, I drive all over for 2 days, deliver it to all those native territories. So, but what I am continuously asked is, how do you keep doing this stuff? You know, aren't you going to burn out? And I said, well, you know, I'm getting towards my mid-50s now, and I haven't burnt out yet. And they said, but how do you not? And I said, well, part of it is that you lower your expectations about how quickly you're going to affect change. And I hate to say that as a terrible compromise, but I think when you get passionate about something and you feel so strongly about it, and you can't believe that you can't make people see what you see, it can be frustrating. And I know you guys in this room know what I'm talking about. And that's part of the challenge, is managing your expectations about how much change you can affect, how quickly you can affect. And I'll tell you, I've seen change. And is it the dramatic change? I mean, I got 6 grandkids now. I thought I was going to have a lot more time to get stuff done before the grandkids were going to come. And you don't have enough time, you know, so you gotta, again, you gotta manage those expectations. But at the same time, you also can't think that your passion is so infectious that you can affect everybody the same way. There are people you're going to brush into, and I don't care what you feel strongly about. You know, Dylan with the the animal activism, you know, marine land animal abuse, the hydrofracking, you know, boreal forest, tar sands oil. There's a lot of things that you could be passionate, and for many of us, we're passionate about all those things, and so you can't spread yourself too thin. I mean, it's impossible to do all of these events all the time, and so you do try to support those people that are doing good work. Even though sometimes you're going to find that there's people in every one of those groups that you're not going to agree with. And certainly as a Native person, there's a whole lot of Native people I don't agree with on a lot of issues, including some of the environmental issues. There are Native people, Tex Hall, who's all about drilling and natural gas, and you know he's one of these guys who commands an audience. I have issues with Oneida, the Oneida Indian Nation of New York leadership, even to the extent that this Washington Redskins issue is in the forefront right now, and you've got guys like Ray Halberter who are spending, I would say, hundreds of thousands of dollars because he wants to champion this issue. He's trying to make this thing his self-serving. I'm the champion of the Washington, and in the meantime, he's a sponsor and a supporter of the NFL. He says it in the same breath that he's criticizing this name and criticizing, whether he's getting his due with the audience from Roger Goodell or whomever. He's bragging about him being a major sponsor. Just like his on Thanksgiving Day, he'll have his Macy's Day float running down through New York. And I don't agree with some of the way that is managed by the quote-unquote Native leadership. I have an issue with how people rise to that level of recognition, especially if that recognition is based solely on the Bureau of Indian Affairs. In this week's column, I write a piece about a gentleman by the name of Jake Thompson. Jake Thompson is Mohawk from Akwesasne, but he was married to Geralda, who would have been a waterman. Yeah, I guess she would have been a waterman. Who was Oneida, and so he had the Oneida sons, and he was very prominent in Oneida. Now, I didn't always agree with Jake. Jake was one of these guys who thought that the Confederacy was not, through the Guyana or the Go or the Great Law, was not being followed properly. So he advocated for elected election-style government, which I didn't agree with. In fact, I was a part of a group that once blocked one of their elections. They tried to have an election at the Hotel Syracuse. I don't know if Joe, if you remember that at all, but they tried to have an election in Syracuse back in the mid-'80s, and I was a part of a group that went there and walked off with all the ballot boxes anyway, because we didn't believe in that process. We felt like we knew what the Bureau of Indian Affairs standard was. They said you only need a majority of what we consider, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, what we consider 30% participation, and you only need a majority of that for us to designate somebody. So, in other words, 16% of the Oneida population, as far as the Bureau of Indian Affairs was concerned, could have determined whatever. So these are the kinds of things that I've opposed. Now, but I will say that Jake, and the reason I bring him up is that he was a leader in other areas. He promoted land claims. He actually created the corridor for land claims to get through federal court. Especially, there's a certain process by which he was challenging the Non-Intercourse Act of 1794, I think it was, and that's what he had, or 1792, in that area. That's what he had was famous for having done. He also was pushed through the Indian Child Welfare Act in a way that most people are not familiar with. He actually got appointed in the state of Massachusetts for some native office under Governor Dukakis at the time. And from that office in the state of Massachusetts, he sent letters on Massachusetts state letterhead to every senator and every congressman to push through the Indian Child Welfare Act. Now, again, I'm not always saying that the courts getting land issues or land reclamation issues in the courts was a good thing, but he advanced that issue. I'm not saying getting a piece of federal legislation to protect our children is the best recourse. I'm one of those guys who say we need less federal legislation. We need more respect to who we are and more respect of our sovereignty. And they can neither legislate our sovereignty away or legislate it by giving it to us. And this gets even to the Violence Against Women's Act. There was a lot of noise throughout Indian country about there being inclusion in VAWA, in the Violence Against Women's Act, to make it so native courts could prosecute non-native perpetrators of violence against women. My issue is if they would just respect our sovereignty and make a full acknowledgement that when a non-native person or anybody who enters our territories, that they leave the jurisdiction of the United States and they enter ours, it would be a moot point. I don't want them trying to legislate and say, okay, we're giving you a power, like they have the authority to give us that power. See, these are some of the basic things that oftentimes our people can start to go down a path, and they go down that path with lawyers and lobbyists and all kinds of advisors with USET and NCAI and the Assembly of First Nations. They go through with all these great intentions of solving things, but they create another problem. They create, he giveth and he taketh away mentality. And I'm one of these people who say, no, we need less. We don't need more. We don't need Obama, hosting 566 federally recognized tribes to pose for pictures in front of his White House Christmas tree every November as a part of his proclamation that November be the National Native American Heritage Month, and then designate Black Friday as our special day. We don't need those kinds of words. We need action, and the action we need the United States to do some basic, simple things, like stop prosecuting our people with organized crime bills. Right now, we've got a couple of people that were a subject of a sting out of Oklahoma City, where they're using the Contraband Cigarette Trafficking Act. This was passed in like 1978, and this was an organized crime bill. This was targeting the mob, in their illicit tobacco trade. We don't have an illicit tobacco trade. We buy cigarettes and we sell cigarettes. We just don't do it under the regulatory control of New York State. So they took this what they call the CCTA, the Contraband Cigarette Trafficking Act, and then they bolstered it with some anti-terrorism laws, like the Patriot Act. So they take the CCTA and the Patriot Act and they put it together, and so now they can and they make this case that somehow illicit tobacco is funding terrorism. Now they have nothing to suggest that our tobacco trade is funding terrorism, but they can generally suggest that the illicit tobacco trade is funding terrorism. And you know what? They might be right, but it isn't doing it through our territory. In fact, Pat Fleener with the Tax Foundation, which is a not-for-profit think tank on tax policy, we had a conversation with that. He says, you know what? He goes, the native tobacco trade, and specifically the mail order, the remote sales development in our trade, has done more to kill the illicit tobacco trade because we were selling direct to consumers. There was no room for terrorists or mobsters. We were selling. Somebody could sit in a living room and order a carton of cigarettes. Where do you fit the where's the payoff on that for the mob? So, and he said, your participation in that, you guys developing that business, has done more to kill the illicit tobacco trade than all of the legislation combined. I mean, and again, he wasn't saying this because he didn't look for me to offer this opinion. I looked for him. I wanted to get some numbers from him on on how much, at what point when you keep raising the taxes on a product, are you building the illicit tobacco trade or the black market trade? And of course, now don't get me wrong, there are people who have come onto our territory that buy more than for their own consumption. And that's an argument that some of our own people have to decide. Well, what do we want to put as the limitations? Do we say, okay, we'll sell somebody 20 cartons, 30 cartons, 40 cartons, or do we say, back the van up, You can load up everything we have here and take it wherever it goes. There's not a whole lot of that happens on our territories. I'm not suggesting that there isn't any of it. I know there's a lot of it in Long Island, and I think that's why there was really so much pressure from Bloomberg specifically against the Shinnecocks and the Puspatucks. But again, my issue with all of that stuff is, let's have a conversation about it. At some point, let's not forget that we're human beings. And instead of you trying to legislate or adjudicate us away, and instead of trying to criminalize what we're doing, because the fact of the matter is even a van load of cigarettes backing up to a native smoke shop, we aren't committing a crime in the commission of that sale. Now, we may be facilitating somebody else who may be selling it in a place that should be, maybe violating some regulations, but we're not the ones doing it. So, can't we have an intelligent conversation about that? I mean, can't we say, you know what, our big market is the end consumer, and we respect the problem that that may be presented with the fact that our sovereignty somehow can be manipulated by others. We can have that conversation. We can have that conversation about gaming. We can have that conversation about environmental issues. The reason I do the show, and the reason I write the column, is that there's not enough of a conversation. We're being preached down to. I mean, even with our special month and our special day, there isn't a meaningful conversation. I went to Washington and met with Jody Gillette. Jody Gillette is the senior policy advisor to the White House on Native American affairs. That's her job. And she's from Standing Rock, so she's Sioux. She knows poverty, although her family's always done all right. Her brother, I think, is the elected chairman or whatever, chief, whatever, of Standing Rock. So they come from the upper crust, but they certainly know what exists in Sioux territory. And I had a conversation with her about one specific topic. And again, here's another example of how a conversation doesn't take place. There was a bill passed in 2009 called CHIPRA. Now, CHIPRA is the Children's Health Insurance Program Reauthorization Act. CHIPRA was all about trying to get health insurance to kids. Sounds good, but the battles between the Republicans and the Democrats is that, no, we're not going to let you pass anything unless you find a way to fund it. So what's the way to fund CHIPRA? Raise the excise tax on cigarettes. All right. Now, for the most part, most of what gets sold on native territories has the excise tax paid. Now, there are some products made on territory, what they call rollies, and a lot of stuff comes out of Mohawk territory that is manufactured by non-ATF regulated manufacturers. But most of the product, including the native product, all the native brands, Senecas, Signals, all those brands you would see on our territory, Herons, they all pay the federal excise tax. So in 2009, when this law got passed, we understood that the cost of doing business was going to go up. And it went up like $6.16. It went from $3.40 something up to I think a full $10. So it raised up, over $6. So it was a significant increase. And most people don't realize how much tax is on a carton of cigarettes. And a carton of cigarettes has $10 excise tax. It's pretty much what you buy out here. It has another $3.40 associated with Master Settlement Act, a payment that's embedded in the price. And then of course you have state excise tax, which I think is about $43 or I don't know, it's really, really high, $43 a carton. And then you got sales tax on top of that. So that's how much tax is on a carton of cigarettes. So that's why when we have a product on our territory and we can sell it for 20 bucks, it's because we have the federal excise tax is on that, but not none of the state, not that $40. And in New York City, they have another $10 or $15 a carton, I think, on top of that. City tax on top of state tax. Now, having said that, New York State, in their tax law, specifically related to cigarettes, they say that anyone can purchase up to 2 cartons of cigarettes anywhere without New York State stamp on it for use and consumption in New York State without having any tax liability. So you can go to Pennsylvania and you can buy 2 cartons of cigarettes from Pennsylvania and consume it in New York State, and you have no tax liability. They're saying anything over that. Now what they tried to argue is that they still have the right to try to tax our sales. So I mean, it's part of that whole thing that's missing in the debate. If you can go to any place in outside of New York State's jurisdiction to buy up to 2 cartons of cigarettes, why couldn't you come to our territories? And they don't come right out and say that, but all of the conversation when they finally eliminated our ability to buy from New York State stamping agents and told the stamping agents you can no longer sell to native territories without a stamp on it, essentially cutting off the premium brands, you know, at least a streamlined way for getting premium brands. That's what that was all about. It was about cutting us off because they believed that they had a right to pre-collect a sales tax on any product that came to our territory except for a product that would be sold to a non-native. Even though state law says that every non-native can buy up to 2 cartons of cigarettes, they never factored that into the equation. And frankly, I don't know if the powers that be who argued these cases in front of these judges ever made that compelling argument. There was always this debate, and it's always an ongoing debate, is do we invoke treaties when we're in court? Well, I'll tell you, one of the areas that I don't have any reservations, no pun intended, about raising controversies. I'm not a fan of these of what people call Indian treaties. I don't think there are any. They were all written by white men. We didn't write a single one of them. And even the ones that they want to call, like when the people refer to the Tooral Wampum Treaty, it's not really a treaty. It's a pretty loose agreement. And I'll talk about that perhaps a little bit later. But all of these treaties, and the one that people refer to as the seminal treaty of the Six Nations, the Canandaigua Treaty, that's the worst piece of crap out of all of them. I mean, it's 7 articles long. No Mohawks were even at the table. Oh, I take it back. Aaron Hill was there, but refused and actually rejected out of hand. Aaron Hill was he sat. I don't know which Mohawk title he sat in, but he was one of the Mohawk titles that heard the pitch. So they call it a treaty with the Six Nations, and they got like 40 or 50 X's on a paper with all these names, and almost all of them are Senecas. And the Senecas don't have that many titles. There's only eight titles within the Seneca Nation. So those other 40 or so names on there. And of course, on those names were guys like Red Jacket, Corn Planter, and Handsome Lake. And the irony is that some of those guys could read and write, and yet still there's only an X on the paper, which if you can figure that one out, maybe explain it to me. But the Canandaigua Treaty is only 7 articles long. The 7th article is a roadmap for how we resolve conflicts with each other. If you commit a crime against our people, we will petition the authorities within the President of the United States or whatever to make sure that justice is imposed upon you. If I commit a crime against you, then you would petition, and that's what Article 7 says. And it's real clear. And then it says, this shall be the way it is until another equitable solution is passed through the great legislature. Now, that's the way it's written on the Kennedy Treaty. That's not the way it was the way it was presented to us. Is this is what we're going to do? We're going to do this until we come up with unless we have a better plan. There's nothing equitable about passing US 232 and 233 and saying, okay, now we're going to give criminal jurisdiction to the state or whatever else. That's not equitable. We weren't a part of that conversation. So we had Article 7 of the Kennedy Treaty clearly lays out how there's going to be respect of each other's sovereignty, even as it relates to how we resolve conflict should a conflict ensue. And this was considered, they actually called this the riot provision. It was an attempt to prevent violence from escalating from native to non-native. Now the other 6 articles, most of them had to do with these lines on a map about all the land the United States was going to claim from Senecas and from others. But what it carved out, and it said 3 times in this treaty, and you can find it, and it's all online, 3 times the same expression is said, and it says, the United States recognizes that our land is ours, and that they will never claim the same. Until such time as we decide to sell, which they have the right to buy, and that kind of stuff. But what it says is, they recognize that we own our land. Not that we have a right to occupancy, that we own it. And that the United States will never claim it. They will never claim our land. It says it 3 times. Now, never is never. I mean, unless it means something else. But apparently it meant something else when it's written on paper. We fight with New York State about jurisdiction on our land. If the United States clearly says in 1794 they will never claim the land that we retain. Now, I mean, they are saying that we could still sell land to them. Of course we could, right? But it is very clear that the land that remains ours, that we retain, the United States will never claim the same. So every November 11th, in the middle of our special month, when people go to Canandaigua and pose for pictures with state and federal politicians and march down the Canandaigua town square and you know, have a buffet at the town hall and get to look at one of the only two original copies of the Canandaigua Treaty behind glass that's held there and have their kumbaya moment. I'm not gonna be there. And I told everybody, invite me there to speak and I'll go. But I'm not going to tell you how great this treaty is. And until Canandaigua Treaty Day is a day of protest, and it's a day of demonstration, it is not a day of celebration. To me, Canandaigua Treaty Day is just as crappy a holiday, which it happens to fall on Veterans Day this year, which is another issue. It's just as bad a holiday as Columbus Day. It is a terrible treaty, and I challenge anybody to read it. And there is another provision in there that says every year there will be a payment made by the United States to the Six Nations, and that payment will be for livestock, farm equipment, machinery, tools, utensils, and cloth. It's $4,500 in 1794. It's $4,500 in 2013 too. $4,500. There's about 100,000 Haudenosaunee, you know, that the United States recognizes. So that's about 4.5 cents worth of cloth every year. And there's and it used to be a woman, so I don't want to sound sexist, but there's a woman in D.C. whose job it is every year to buy $4,500 for the cloth. And I mean to tell you, there are some of the people in our territories, Joey, I know you know some of them, who treat this treaty cloth like it's the Shroud of Turin. I swear, they treat this thing like, oh, it's so sacred. No, it's not sacred. It's insulting. Because they never, and there are huge periods of time that not even that $4,500 ever got spent. But again, there was no cost of living increase on that $4,500. So again, so we have some people who say, oh, the United States, they still honor that treaty. They still send that treaty cloth every year. Yeah, but what about the never gonna claim our land thing? That was a bigger deal to me than the $4,500 for the cloth. So, yeah, I ruffle a few feathers, especially when I poke fun at treaty cloth. I do poke fun at treaty cloth. And there are some people, especially old timers, who really, Joe, you can imagine how sentimental some people get over that kind of thing. But I'm gonna do it because I want people, and if they don't like my sarcasm and and the fact that I make light of it or or worse, then let's have a conversation about it. And who knows? Maybe we could do something with that cloth. I don't know. I don't know what you could do with 4.5 cents worth of cloth, but I don't know. But so well, and the thing is, obviously it doesn't get distributed amongst 100,000 Haudenosaunee. It turns into this whole thing about who are the special families that'll get larger bolts of it, and so they can make their ribbon shirts or whatever else. And it's crappy cloth. I mean, it's not like it's special. The only thing that's special about it is that it's treaty cloth. Anyway, that's my view. And I'm going to tell you, all of the treaties are crappy. I mean, and Canandaigua was, came after Stanwix and Schuyler and Harmer. I mean, and every one of those was willing. In the Mohawk word for treaty means we give up our land. That's what it literally translates to, because that's what it always was. But even when we didn't give up our land, it is treated as if it was. I mean, the Senecas went through this in the 90s, renegotiating or trying to do a settlement act on the Salamanca lease. There were leases that the United States and New York State and these land companies approved. Not just 99-year leases. Can you imagine a 999-year lease? And then, of course, what our people are told is, oh, no, the land's yours. No, it's yours. We're just going to use it. And you sign this paper and it says we can use it for 999 years. And so our people get lured into this thing, and then if it's not, when the leases weren't paid for, which they never were, after a fashion, we had no recourse to do anything about it. That Article 7 of the Canandaigua Treaty, that kind of stuff being recognized almost immediately. And we didn't have what you would call legal standing to bring a case into court. That's part of what that Jake Thompson did with the United Land Claims. He created a vehicle that allowed, a vehicle to have standing in the court. Now, you can make an argument either way whether having a standing in court has played very well for us, and I'll kind of mention something about that. In 2010, Ross John and I went down to Washington, D.C. for a series of meetings they called the State Department Consultation on the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. In 2007, the world passed the UN DRIP, the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. It passed by a huge majority. There were several abstentions, and there were 4 no votes. Canada, the United States, Australia, and New Zealand. Those are the 4 countries that voted against it. Not just abstained, they voted against it, and that was in 2007. But regardless, it passed. Now, but it still hangs out that you've got 4 countries that actually voted against, and there's nothing new in the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. It's the same document, essentially, as the Declaration of Human Rights, which was passed in the 50s, I think. So, I mean, it's the same document. It's just that there's a few other, the biggest change in it is this notion of free, prior, and informed consent for things that are being done to us. Imagine that, how novel an idea that we would actually have to agree to things like giving up our land or having resources extracted from them, or Kinzua Dam, grabbing up 10,000 acres of Seneca land, or however many acres got grabbed up for the reservoir in Tuscarora. Imagine that we would actually have, that somebody would suggest, the international community would suggest that we should have some, like, consent should be an issue. So we went down to this consultation, and the first day was just tribal leadership, and frankly, it was a full day of bullshit. There was more talk in that day about honoring sacred sites than anything else. Here you've got so-called leadership sitting there. I looked at the Haudenosaunee delegation sitting right beside the State Department. There they were. The Onondagas, the Tonawondas, the Cayugas, they're all sitting right there, right beside the State Department. Hillary Clinton wasn't there, but right beside the State Department. Not once. Now, and keep in mind, this is 2010. And this was in August. And the significance of that will come up a little bit later. But so nothing got mentioned about any other Haudenosaunee issues. In fact, Darwin Hill just stood up and talked and bragged about how hard they worked on the UN DRIP and you know, basically taking credit for, you know, all the good work that was done there. So that's what was discussed day one. The second day was the NGO day. That means the rest of us could speak. And I spoke. They had a microphone, and I gravitated to microphones, so I spoke, and frankly, I spoke for way longer than they wanted me to speak. I spoke for about 45 minutes straight. They wanted somebody to go to a microphone and ask a question. I didn't ask a question. I gave testimony, and nobody shut me up. They had all of the agencies up on the stage. This is at the National Native American Museum, NMA, National Museum of the American Indian, part of the Smithsonian. They're all up on the stage, all the agencies, DOE, DOT, you know, Defense Department, Interior Department, Treasury Department, Department of Homeland Security, State Department. They're all up there, right? And I just ripped into every one of them. Everything from draft registration to taxation to, you know, DEC was up there, EPA, and environmental issues. But I also talked about this travel document bullshit that is being imposed upon everybody, but it's particularly a problem for those of us. I'm a Mohawk from Mohawk, which is on the Canadian side, so it presents a real problem for any of us Haudenosaunee that travel. Somebody put a border between our communities. I mean, Akwesasne has a border through the middle of the community. Cornwall Island is considered Ontario, Snai is considered Quebec, and the rest of St. Regis is considered New York. It's all Akwesasne as far as and yet they got borders to it. They got provincial borders, international borders. But we didn't put them there. So this travel issue is a big deal. So I raised the issue associated not only with their enhanced travel cards that they're trying to pitch, but the Haudenosaunee passports. A week later is when the debacle about the Iroquois Nationals made national news, that they weren't allowed to go play in the World Cup for lacrosse in Manchester, England. A week later. Again, those guys sat right there beside the State Department. Perfect audience, perfect opportunity. That issue could have been started then, but instead, a little over a week later is when it turns into this debacle, which it still isn't resolved today. We still don't have our Haudenosaunee passports recognized by the United States. And again, that whole thing, it starts with Great Britain, who did sign the UN DRIP. They did sign. They're one of the nations that approved it, and yet they're the ones who rejected letting the Iroquois nationals come to the. And why? They said, well, if the United States doesn't recognize their passports, how do we know they're going to let them back in the country? And, you know, of course, any time that we've ever traveled, and I've never done it, but every time our people have ever traveled on a Haudenosaunee passport, we've said, don't worry, they're not going to keep us out of the United States. That's never an argument for us, but that's what the countries who receive us always say, wow, we don't know they're going to. So this big argument ensues about whether, and we've been traveling on these Haudenosaunee passports for years, but that was an issue that I brought up. In fact, I was the only person that brought it up in my 45-minute rant to everybody on the stage. But the other thing that kept coming up, and it happened in day one and day two of this thing, was the conversation about, because one of the things I asked early on was, what was the main reason offered up, because it wasn't talked about right away, why the United States rejected it in 2007. Somebody right there was right on the spot with the report that was issued by the State Department, why they rejected it. And what was clear was they rejected it because their concern was how much this UN DRIP would reshape international law. And would it undermine what the United States called its current remedy for conflict with Native people? And I said, what is this current remedy? You've mentioned it several times here in 2 days. What are you calling your current remedy? And they said, well, court. I said, so you're suggesting that the only remedy the United States has is court? So us entering into your jurisdiction, most of our arguments are issues of sovereignty. By definition, a sovereign cannot have a fair trial in a court that is only that it can only rule on issues of their own constitution. And if your constitution doesn't cover us, which it clearly didn't and doesn't, then how can your courts be the remedy? I said the remedy is what we're doing here, is talking. The remedy is statesmanship. The remedy is what our relationship was really built upon in the first place, which was enough respect to be able to have a conversation. Now, I'm not saying that we weren't always double-dealed with all along the way. George Washington was selling off military tracts of native land, all the while telling our people how protected our land was going to be. So we were being cheated, right from the start. And the thing about our special month is last year on December 2nd, I wrote a column on my blog. It was before the Drew Times, and I said there was our special month. Who knew? I called up WBFO and I spoke with Eileen Buckley, and I sent her kind of a pretty crappy email, and I said, you guys did nothing. I said, in fact, NED did nothing. The History Channel did nothing. AMC, classic movies, they didn't even run the Dances with Wolves marathon. They didn't, nothing. There was nothing on television. I know what happens during Black History Month, and I don't begrudge what happens in Black History Month, but nobody knew. Did anybody know that it was our special month? No. Yeah, it's our special month. This is it, November. We got Canandaigua Treaty Day that happens to be Veterans Day. So, not a whole lot happening that day. We have, John Kennedy gets shot this month, 50 years ago. So, we got some Kennedy stories we could talk about, but no Kennedy stories, not as it relates to the Haudenosaunee. Abraham Lincoln, he did the Gettysburg Address. Yeah, we talk about Abraham Lincoln, just like they talked about it last January, because that was the 150th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation, which happened to be a month after the largest mass execution in the history of the United States, signed by Abraham Lincoln, where 38 Dakotas were hung by the neck in Mankato, Minnesota, the day after Christmas in 1862. We get to celebrate, this will be the 151st anniversary of that glorious occasion. Largest mass execution in the history of the United States, signed by Abraham Lincoln. So, the great emancipator or the great executioner? I would argue that all his fluff with the Emancipation Proclamation and fluff about the Gettysburg Address was all political motivation. You can judge somebody by the stuff that doesn't get publicized. And the stuff that didn't get publicized was how the only reason 300 weren't executed on December 26, 1862, is because Lincoln was concerned how it was going to look. So he said, give me those numbers. I can't execute all that many. Let me whittle this thing down. So we whittled it down to 38. Largest mass execution in the history of the United States, signed by executive order. And these were 300, and I want to say 307 Dakotas, half-breeds, that's what they were called, and all these other nice words they were told, were tried in about a week as enemy camp combatants in a military tribunal. If any of this stuff sounds familiar, then as enemy combatants, and 30 of them were executed. The rest of them had the privilege of dying in prison, and they died in prison. They weren't let go. Now, why were they tried in the first place? Because at the very beginning of 1862, Abraham Lincoln signed the Homestead Act, which opened up all of this territory for settlement by white people. And the Dakotas and Lakotas, they were all supposed to get paid, and they didn't get paid. They didn't get food, they didn't get paid. So the fact of the matter is, these people were pissed. And so they started pushing the people back out and raiding villages and stole food. Can you imagine the audacity of that? So that's what these people were tried for. They were tried as enemy combatants because they were raiding villages and killing people. And trust me, a lot of them were getting killed in the process too. There was a lot of animosity because you had angry Indians who had land taken from them, and they didn't even get the payment that they were supposed to get for the land or the food or any of that other stuff. And it would be years later, just like with the Trail of Tears. But people don't realize that all of that land where all those Cherokees got marched off of, they never got paid for it until years, decades later. Now, I'll mention Trail of Tears because the other thing that's really special about our special month is football season. So, you guys have probably heard some of the Redskins stuff, but let's not even go there yet. Let's talk about high school football. Because with high school football, we have things like the Lancaster Redskins right here locally. And we have all kinds of teams named Indians. So what happens when these teams that use our image or our likeness or appropriate something from us, not because they honor us, they claim they honor us, but because they want to glean something from who they think we are and call it their own. So they want that noble fierceness and savagery and athleticism, essentially, to be associated with them as they're on the football field or baseball diamond or whatever. So you have teams playing against the such and such Indians. So what do you do? What happens? What did sports writers do for 6 decades when this became really popular? Is it 6 decades? Yeah, it's probably maybe a little longer than that. Every time you had the Indians playing a team, if they got beat, it was the Indians were slaughtered by the Red Sox, or the Cowboys scalped the Redskins this weekend. That's what sportscasters were doing. So that was common practice. So now when you have high school, you know how to make those big paper signs, and they call them buster signs, and the football team all prays, they run through and they break the line. So 2 high schools this week decided that using the Trail of Tears as a reference, they said was appropriate when they were playing against the Indians. So one of them was like, get ready to march on the Trail of Tears again. He's got the pictures that he can, I know he's fighting with it, but two separate schools. Now, and I think one was down south, and I don't know where. One was in Alabama, and one was in another place. But you'll see those. I got to post it on my Facebook page. But 2 separate schools decided that citing. Now, the idea of citing the Trail of Tears because it's funny is kind of like citing the train to Auschwitz, or maybe we can make rape jokes, But how you could cite the Trail of Tears, and now of course. The superintendents or principals have both apologized since then. They said they're going to have better sensitivity training. But let's face it, the kids didn't come up with this on their own. And even if they did, they were adults approving it. And I'll tell you, it's not just this notion. This is the one here. This was Dyersburg Trojans. This is in Mother Jones. You can find this. There's the link up there. Again, go to my Facebook group page, and you can find all this stuff. This is the other one. Hey Indians, get ready to leave in the Trail of Tears, round 2. So that's what was deemed appropriate for this team that was playing against another team that was called the Indians. And of course, this is what the opponents do when you have a team that is associated with living human beings. Now, but it doesn't stop here. Go ahead and put the picture. This is what a Philadelphia Eagles fan thinks is appropriate. This is a guy who goes into a football arena, goes into a stadium with a duffel bag, and what he's got is an Indian head, and he impales it with a knife, and across his face it says "Redskin, Deadskin." What? And so he gets to go into a football arena with an impaled Indian head at a football game. Now, well, that's got to be kind of an isolated thing. No, not quite, because if you look this guy up, he also is a Flyers fan too. And who did the Flyers play in the hockey playoffs last year? The Blackhawks. So he goes to a Blackhawks game with the same Indian head, only this time he's got orange paint on his face. And not only does he go, again, he's allowed in the arena, in the hockey arena, with the impaled head. This time it says "Dead Blackhawks" or something on the face. But not only is he allowed to go in there with this stuff, but during the Blackhawks game, Versus Network that was broadcasting the game thought it would be really neat to use this guy as the backdrop for when they went to commercial to go to score. So there on network television, or on sports television, is this guy with an impaled Indian head, and it says Flyers 4, Blackhawks 2. we'll be right back, you know, kind of thing. And they did it multiple times. It wasn't just one time. There's several different images of this same guy with the impaled Indian head. Now, it's fine. I'm not. The mascot issue isn't the issue. The issue is that somehow that's appropriate. Because I would dare say that Philadelphia Eagles guy could not go into a Redskins-Eagles game with a black head that says RG3 across his forehead in a noose. I'm pretty sure that he would not be able to do that. I'm pretty sure they can't say have a bust-through paper that says something about gassing Jews. I'm pretty sure that would not be tolerated. But this is tolerated. This is the world that we still live in. And see, and unlike these morons, and I gotta call them morons, who say, yeah, but how is this different than the Vikings? Well, because we're still here. We still live here, and we still live. There's a guy, anybody know who L. Frank Baum is?
Oh, yeah.
He wrote The Wizard of Oz. Now, some people think The Wizard of Oz was a children's story. There's an entire course study at many universities that delve into the analysis of what L. Frank Baum's Wizard of Oz series was all about. But L. Frank Baum, before he wrote The Wizard of Oz, was an editor of The Pioneer, which was a newspaper in Aberdeen, South Dakota. He wrote what is called the Baum Genocide editorials, and I encourage you to look it up online. You can read them; they're not very long. And they were written. One was written right after Sitting Bull was murdered, and the basic gist of both of his editorials was, "We just need to kill these Indians. We just got to exterminate them." He said, "Look, Sitting Bull's dead. He was the last good one. You know, there's no more good ones left. He was the last noble one of them all. Now the rest of them are just a pack of mangy cur that lick the hand that smites us. Look, it's better that we just kill them. That way they can live in our history. The princes, the kings of the forest and the plain that James Fenimore Cooper wrote of. Let's honor them by killing them." That's what L. Frank Baum wrote. And again, I'm paraphrasing, but by all means, pull it up, look it up. He wrote two of them, one right after Sitting Bull was killed and murdered, and he calls it that in his editorial. And he said, the only thing that makes sense for us to do is, we've wronged these people so much, we've wronged these people so bad, and we've turned them into this miserable, despicable beings. We should just exterminate them. He used the word exterminate them. And then, so what happens, he wrote this thing, and this was like on mid-December or early December. A week later was the massacre at Wounded Knee. And then he wrote of the massacre at Wounded Knee. And he said, well, that was pretty sad. You know, and he calls down the general who was responsible for it. Even though that's what he called for, he's, well, that's it. Now we really better just kill the rest of them. We should just exterminate them all. It's the only thing that we can do that's in the interest of our own security. And frankly, you know, because in the end, it's like a backhanded compliment. There's this mentality that he has that, man, what these Indians represented was so noble, but man, not anymore. And that's what's on the side of that Redskins helmet. What's on the side of that Redskins helmet, and the word Redskin, we're not Redskins, but it's what the American culture has gleaned from us, what they've misappropriated from us, this image. You know, the red face, the guys who put red face on at Cleveland Indians games. You know, the guy who spends $3,000 for an authentic regalia and then runs around the University of Illinois football field doing cartwheels in an authentic regalia, an absolute mockery of what it all represents, eagle feathers and all. You know, it's a misappropriation of an image that somebody wants to claim as their own. It's like we're going to take it. It's not American history, but we're going to make it American history. We want to be able to, and at the same time that some of these, you know, including some of the high schools, you got to remember, all of a sudden, you ever wonder why somebody thought it was great to put an Indian head on a penny or on a nickel? Well, it's because there was this love-hate relationship that the United States has always had with this notion. You know what happened to Geronimo after they captured him? They paraded him around like a monkey. Teddy Roosevelt paraded him, he put him on horseback so he could march through Washington for his inauguration.
It was here.
Was it here?
Pan Am.
Oh, yeah, right. But in D.C. as well.
Yeah.
So they paraded Geronimo around like a monkey. They reduced him to this. That's what that Redskins helmet does. That's what the Cleveland Indians did. That's what the Blackhawks jersey does. It reduces us to something that is not human. It is a cartoon. It is an image. And the thing is that this stuff exists because it's okay. That's the problem. The problem isn't the Washington Redskins. The problem wouldn't be if that was on a helmet. That's not the problem. The problem is 80% of the American population says, no, I don't want to change the Redskins name. It was polled. I mean, and a pretty broad-based poll. When those same people are asked, and this actually right in D.C. they did a poll, and they asked the people who lived in the Washington D.C. area, and they said, do you think the name should change? And it was almost 90% said no. When they asked those same people, would you call a Native person a Redskin? They said, oh no. By a large majority, it wasn't 90%, but by a large majority, the same people who said no, we shouldn't change the name, a majority of those same people said, nah, I wouldn't call them that though. So, in other words, it would be, in Washington, D.C., it would be appropriate to walk up to a black man who's 6'4", weighs 350 pounds, and muscles that, that could crush walnuts and all that other stuff, to ask him if he's a Redskin. Because you'd be meeting a football player. To ask him that. I'm not saying he would be, but it would be appropriate to ask that question. But it would be inappropriate to ask me. Or my good friend Greg Deal, who is usually making a big issue of this all in D.C. So don't ask a Native person if he's a Redskin, because that'd be inappropriate. But you can ask somebody who looks like a football player if they're a Redskin. I mean, there's
really insulting some Native community.
Well, and
D.C.
What's that?
Unless you're really insulting someone.
Oh yeah, no, and
Native community that works in D.C.
And yet there are still people within Indian country, and don't get me wrong, you can go into every native territory and you can find somebody with a Redskins jacket, or an Indian's hat, or a Blackhawks jersey. And I'll tell you why. And this is just a matter of fact. We are so marginalized in the American culture that there are people in our community that have so very little to identify within the dominant culture around us that yes, they do identify with that. And a lot of kids, Native kids, they'll root for the Redskins. Then as they get older, they realize, man, that's pretty appropriate. But what do we have to draw to in the dominant culture around us? I mean, I knew people who would who would love the opportunity to rip off one of those Niagara Mohawk patches off of people's shirts. And, oh yeah, that's a nice patch. Well, wait a minute. Do you realize what that really represents? I mean, yeah, it's a native image. Just like Indian head buffalo, buffalo head or Indian head nickels and pennies and all that stuff. I mean, the Sacagawea dollar. I mean, even the Hiawatha belt, which is done wrong on this. Did you see that when they had the dollars that they do the dollar coins? Yeah. They've been doing some with native images on them. Sacagawea was on the front and on the back side. They had three sisters one time, but they even had again, and it puts the Hiawatha belt. It doesn't say Hiawatha belt on it. It says the Great Law. Which one's that one?
John Tyler.
Oh yeah. And the problem is, I know people say the Great Law of Peace when they're referring to the Hiawatha belt, but the Guyana or the Goa doesn't translate to the Great Law of Peace. The word peace is in it. The only word that's in there that is in the Great Law is great, Goa. Guyana or the Goa means a great, it's actually redundant. It would literally mean a great good path. What it means is a great way a path to follow. It's a great path because we had, even at the time that Hiawatha and Daganowida were reuniting the 5 nations at the time, and I say 5 nations, it wasn't really 5 nations, it was the 49 families of the Haudenosaunee that lived in 5 regions, because we really weren't designated 5 nations. There was just 5 areas. A Mohawk was a Gunyagahaga, meant the people that lived in the land of Flint. The Oneidas were the Uniotaaga, the people who land where the stones are stood up. The stones that are left from the glaciers in the field, that's what this refers to. The Onondaga, which is the people of the hills. The Kuyugaaga, the people of the marshes. And the Onondawaga, the people of the big hills, the Senecas. And then the Tuscaroras, who joined later, they really weren't called Tuscaroras, they were really called Gatantawaga, and that means the people of the cypress, the land of the cypress, because they lived in that marshy area, that swamp area, and the cypress, or they called it the sunken pine. They were called Tuscarora because they developed an industry out of separating hemp and making rope and twine and cloth. And so people say, well, Tuscarora means a shirt wearer. No, it doesn't mean shirt wearers. It doesn't mean hemp gatherers either. It means they separate the hemp. They broke the fibers down. The word Tuscaroras means they separate the hemp. It's an action. It's not a description. But anyway, just a little side note, I guess. But no, this is why. This effort to reunite the people was to not separate nations. What we had is we had 49 families, and then there was a person who would be asked to carry the words of each one of those families. And so what people call a chief, we called it Royan or Rudionisu, and what it means is that he, because this is the male, there was also the clan mother would have a similar name like that, but he is placed on a path. Doesn't say he's elevated. People say, oh, they raised up a chief. No, even that is taken out of context. So when people talk about the great law of peace, it wasn't a great law of peace. It was a way. Everything was a process, and it wasn't a code of conduct. In the great law in the Guyana Ragoa, it doesn't say, thou shalt not gamble, thou shalt not smoke cigarettes, thou shalt not drink beer on Tuesdays, thou shalt not smoke reefer. There's nothing like that in the Guyana Ragoa. What the Guyana Ragoa was, it talked about process, everything for how you would marry a couple, the things that you would ask them, and put to not only to that couple, but to the whole family. That's what's in the Guyana Ragoa, right? And this is what people don't think about this. They don't think about what the process is for and why there's a process. The process it's not about protocol. See, and that's what people get stickler when people think about, Constitution, you got to do it this way. Well, according to Wampum 37 of the Guyana Ragoa, you can't, no. It's something that's taken in the whole. And what you do is you talk about a process. We have, and in the Guyana Ragoa, there's certain things that are talked about metaphorically, some that are talked about literally, and some that can go both ways. The first three strings of the Guyana Ragoa, it refers to a lot of times the Guyana Ragoa was formed after a very, very bad time. A lot of death. There was a lot of violence amongst the 49 families, these 5 regions of our people. So we treated it, we call those first 3 strings, we actually sometimes refer to it as a small condolence, because we were condoling the dead. And in fact, when we put, when we designate a Rayana or Rudianisu, or chief, we call that a condolence. I recently wrote an article, and in the article that's here, I referred to Jake Thompson as not having ever been a chief, and that he was not condoled. And somebody asked me, what does that mean? Because in English language, condole isn't a verb. It's a condolence is something else. I mean, it's not. We use it. We use it as a verb. To condole somebody means to put somebody as a chief. So I realized that because other people besides Haudenosaunee are going to read that, so I kind of rephrased it a little bit. But so we call this a condolence because at the same time, and the reason we refer to this whole period of time, well, the reason you need to put a new chief in place is because frankly, the other one died, or became incapacitated at some level, but whatever, or was removed. But even if it was removed, that's almost like a death in the family. So we refer to that period of time, we always refer to our families as a fire. And so we talk about, it's not the Grim Reaper, but there's a, in our culture, we talk about the woman who carries that staff and hits that fire. And that's when death comes into a community. And when that fire, those logs get scattered, and the ashes come up, and it burns in the eyes, and it gets in your ears, and you're breathing in. And that's a metaphor for the very feelings you have when you're grieving. Because you're hard to talk to. It's hard to speak. And your eyes are tearing. So the first three strings of the Guyana Ragor refer to taking that eagle feather, the wing, the one that comes to a point, to clean the ears off, so they can hear the words, the good words. So the same words that Hayawenta strung on when he was first started using wampums to say, if I ever know anybody who's felt the grief that I have, these are the words I'm going to say. This was part of it. I'm going to clean the ears. And then you're going to take the softest part of the doe skin from the belly of a doe, and you're going to wipe the eyes off, and you're going to clean the eyes out. Remove that pain from the eyes. And then you're going to find an underground spring, a place where the clearest water is available, and you're going to take that and you're going to serve that up to those who are grieving, because so they can clear the throat. So the first three strings of our wampum, of the Guyana Ragor, refer to allowing people to hear, allowing people to see, and allowing people to speak. And it always comes back to that same thing. If we aren't willing to see each other, if we aren't willing to hear each other, and if we're not willing to talk to each other, then we have things like court as the remedy for our conflicts. You know, the thing about doing my radio show, the reason I started doing the show was too many times some of the guys that I am the most closest to, and even people that I weren't close to, where you'd have that great opportunity to sit around, drink coffee, and talk, and say, man, somebody else should have heard this conversation. Even sitting here, there's something, when I come down and pick up the papers here, come down and chew the fat with Nate. There's conversations that it's unfortunate that we sometimes have conversations that other people should hear. That's the premise of doing my show. I wanted to have conversations that other people would hear. And it's a live show. It's a call-in show, 803-1520. Call in. I mean, and Frank and I got more non-native callers than I do native callers. In fact, it's like the same two guys that call. That's a whole other issue. But anyway, the conversation is important. And even if the conversation, and I can have some pretty intense conversations with people that sometimes I'll agree with them on like on 1,000 things, and there'll be like 2 things that become a point of contention. But we don't need to in some of these circumstances, it's more important to address those 3 things that are points of contention. Let's talk about it. You know, don't get excited about it, but you know, there are guys like myself and Paul Delarone, who's on my show often, who sometimes get louder as we talk more. But nobody's yelling at anybody, even if we get loud. And we try to laugh when we do the show. And in fact, even as I've done other programs, I try to make sure that people understand that even as I'm talking about something really serious, there's a room to smile. When I had that, I had a funny circumstance happen at the Galleria Mall last January when the I Know the More stuff was getting pretty busy. There was a lot of these round dances that were happening in a lot of places. Not many out here. There was a couple. We did something on the Peace Bridge, did something at McKinley Mall. Not many showed up. In fact, Joe was there. Did something at the Boulevard Mall, but then the Galleria Malls, and it just so happened that Nate was celebrating his acquittal down here in town that same day, and so I said to Matt Hill, who was on my show, and I said, Matt, let's want to go see Nate's. Nate's got a reception, and kind of celebrating the fact that he was acquitted and that kind of stuff. And hey, and then there's a round dance over at the Galleria Mall on the way, so let's stop by there. So we stopped at Valley Galleria first, and there were a lot of people there. It was busier than the other ones that went to it, but there was this mall cop that was just losing his mind, and you know, and at first, you know, I was kind of just talking with somebody who hadn't seen it, who happened to be there for the same reason I was there, and we were just talking, and they hadn't even started singing yet. But I already saw this mall cop just kind of look around and realizing that it probably isn't check day and there's entirely too many Indians here. So, I mean, I'm putting words in his mouth, but he was already getting nervous. Then they started playing, and it was a pretty good sized group playing, and there were younger kids on one side and some of the more mature singers as a circle went around, and bigger guys on the other side. The mall cop came over and was trying to pester the kids, and I said, Matt, we better get over there. I mean, I went there I was going to dance. I mean, so I went inside and I just kept standing in front of him and getting in his way. And, you know, and every time he tried to walk by them, I'd get in his way. And finally, I said, "Are we going to have a problem here?" And he starts dropping F-bombs, saying, "You goddamn right, you're going to have a problem." He goes, "You people are all trespassing." And this better. And he kept screaming, he kept saying, "Stop, stop!" And nobody's hearing him. These guys are just pounding away. And I said, "Really?" I said, over singing songs, and he was like, he was livid. And he goes, "Yep, I got the Cheektowaga police, the Williamsburg police, and Clarence police are coming here right now." And I said, "Well, bring it on." And so he stormed off, and I don't know why, but I decided, I took my jacket off and I handed it to Matt, and I said, "Here, hold on to this." So now I look like I'm asking for a fight, and I don't know why I did that, but anyway, I handed him my jacket. So, and part of it is because I had a big red shirt on. I figured, you know, red's gonna, you know, be more intimidating rather than my winter jacket or whatever. So Matt finds him. He goes, "Your flag's in the pocket." So he pulls out a flag, and he was holding and carrying on with that. Sure enough, eventually Cheektowaga police come in, and I didn't know. I don't know how the reputation the Cheektowaga police have, but apparently it's not very good. And so, and the one guy is like a little hard guy. I mean, he's not a big guy, but he's like, you know, high and tight, Marine, you know, like a big tough guy. But he was little, and he's making a line, you know, and he's walking at a pretty good gait. So I kind of walked his way, and we kind of brushed shoulders. And Matt tries to get in the way a little bit. So when Matt got in the way, it almost made us bump into each other a little bit. So the guy turns on, he grabs me. So I grabbed him, and so we're and I'm thinking, I don't know how this is going to go here, and but I immediately break up into a big smile. I said, "What are you doing? Are you crazy?" And I walked him back like 3 steps, and I didn't even know that I had done that. But anyway, so we had this physical exchange, and I talked him down. Nobody got arrested. But I kept smiling at him, and I appealed to his better judgment, and so nothing happens in the end. Of course, then I went to Nate's thing, and then my wife called me up, and she said, "I have not been on Facebook in 2.5 months, and I get on Facebook, and what do I see? You fighting with a cop on video on YouTube." I said, "Oh, babe, it wasn't like that. It was." She was, "And it's a Friday. You know, you're not supposed to do this stuff on a Friday because then you got to sit in jail till Monday," which is one of the things that I always say. Like, throw it at me. And I said, "No, it wasn't that big a deal. We just bumped into each other." And then Matt's got his phone, and he's looking at me. He goes, so he hands me the phone and he says, "Oh, well, it didn't seem like it was that big a deal because it looked worse on video than I remembered it. I thought we just kind of talked to each other. I didn't recall the whole thing of pulling each other's shirts and walking backwards, and so. But anyway, that was that's the closest thing to me ever doing a viral video, and it got seen several thousand times, but it wasn't not a big deal. But my wife's like, she's like giving me all kinds of hell when she's saying, "What are the kids gonna think?" And next thing you know, my daughter, "Dad, I'm so proud of you." And then it's like, "Well, Fred, see, it's not playing that bad with the kids." "Well, when you got grandkids, what are the kids gonna think if you're in jail?" I says, "You know, sooner or later they're gonna find out that I had been before." So, but again, my point is that not all conflict has to go bad. I mean, even in a situation where it gets tense like this. And I've been when they didn't go so good. And, you know, and part of this thing may have happened the way it happened because I'm older. And I did smile a lot. So I think I didn't come across as threatening. I was a little bigger than him. but I don't think he was intimidated by. What I was trying to intimidate him by was the 400 people there hanging over balconies, all videotaping him, and all the girls who had cell phone stuff in his face. I said, "What are you going to do here?" I said, "Come on." I said, they call this a flash mob round dance, and if these guys didn't know what was going on, then it's their fault because they did one at the Pyramid Mall or the Carousel Mall, which is owned by the same company in Syracuse just last week. I said, so they should have known, and if they didn't know, it's on them. And then I find out that there are people who have done that in the mall before, only they were like singing Christmas carols, and that was okay. So you can do a flash mob Christmas carols, but you can't do a flash mob round. And nobody was like, nobody was doing anything bad. In fact, most of those people ate there and they shopped there. So I think I even bought a Orange Julius or something. I didn't buy purchase or anything, but so that was the whole issue is, you can get past that if you're willing to. And the hard part is on our side is being diplomatic enough to do it, but at the same time appealing to reason. When I went down and met with Jody Gillette, the issue that I was talking about was this chip run. It wasn't just that the excise tax got raised. What they did is they had a small clause at the back end of that law that said, it was called the floor tax provision. And the floor tax provision was that they would, in order to keep people from stockpiling a bunch of product and paying the old tax rate in advance of the tax going up so they could sell it later, they said any product sitting on a floor that was assessed at the old tax that still wasn't sold would be assessed the tax increase as of April 1st, it just happened to be April Fool's Day, 2009. So if you had a product that was on your floor, paid at the old rate, and this was geared towards Philip Morris and major wholesalers and bonded warehouses. That's what this was. We assume, well, they don't mean us. They don't mean a smoke shop, with cigarettes on the shelves. And about 2.5 years later, so this happens, this comes into law 2009, April 1st. Almost 3 years later, our guys started getting letters in the mail. It said, the Trade and Tax Bureau, TTB, Tobacco Trade and Tax Bureau, have assessed you for $150,000 for tobacco we believe was on your premises or that it was in your possession. And it's like $150,000. And we're talking about millions and millions. A couple of people actually got assessed for over $1 million. But I know some people who were as low as $40,000 or $50,000, but some that were several $100,000. Now, they didn't provide any evidence to what they were basing that assessment on. And we still had mail order going on at the time. So a mail order, the way a mail order works is you take the orders and then you buy the product and you send it out. You're not warehousing it. And some of these guys are doing a lot of a pretty good volume. But this law was based on product that these guys assumed was sitting on a shelf or sitting on a warehouse floor. And that's not the way most of our businesses work. And again, some of the smoke shops, they have inventory. And that would still be significant at $6 a carton, and every carton on the shelf. So the guy, so I decided I was going to, I went over to Kirsten Gillibrand's office and Brian Higgins' office, and I said, and I met with the people. I said, did you guys intend for this to happen? Was it your intention that for the first time in our history, you would try to assess a tax on something that we legally purchased that's in our possession on our territories after the fact? You're going to assess us a tax for something that's in our possession? And they said, we're going to have to get back to you on that. We're not sure what we had in mind. So I get an email a couple of weeks later that says, no, we didn't do that. It had nothing to do with you guys. This was towards major manufacturers. The fact that you're getting assessed this stuff is just an unintended consequence of an otherwise good law. And I said, so it's a mistake? And they said, yeah. I said, well, what do we do about it? No, I don't know. Well, I mean, can you do something? And they said, well, do you want us to write a letter?
Several?
Yeah, you could write a letter, but I said, how about you give me a meeting with At the time, before Jody Gillette, there was another woman in that position. Her name was Kim Teehee. I said, how about you get me a meeting with Kim Teehee and provide a letter of support to her? I mean, to explain to her that that it was not the legislative intent of this law to impose the floor tax on native territories. How about you just say that? And they said, okay, we can do that. Then the internal politics happened. The president of Seneca Nation, a little annoyed that, why is this Mohawk guy dealing with Seneca issue? I said, well, it's not really a Seneca issue, Rob. It's everybody's getting this stuff. And so he actually cut the legs out of this thing. But I kept after it. Teehee resigned, and I'm thinking, oh, great, I know how this goes. They won't have another person in that position for 8 months. And sure enough, Jody Gillette, who I already knew, because Jody Gillette and Kim Teehee were two of those people on the stage that I gave shit to in 2010. So they kind of knew me already, and I knew them. And I'm thinking, well, that probably isn't going to play that well now. But it turns out Jody Gillette, after a lot of pressure, decided to meet with us. And so Ross John, and Dakota Snyder went down. Liz Hill, who is a PR person in DC, who was a good friend of mine, she attended. And we had a meeting for several hours with the senior policy advisor from the White House. So I went there pretty well armed. I said, look, but back even in the Clinton administration, but certainly in the Bush administration and with the Obama administration, there is an standing executive order that says if an executive department or agency develops a policy that has tribal implications, the president is ordering them to have consultation and to seek collaboration with tribes. President said so. It's an order. It's an executive order. And the Treasury Department is an executive department or agency. The TTP, the Department of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, that's all executive branch stuff, right? So that's what I went there with. And she said, well, kind of the problem we have right now is we've been getting a lot of grief over this. This administration has been getting a lot of grief over this IRS, not-for-profit, Tea Party stuff, and so the idea of us interceding on this. Wait. I said, wait. There's an executive order that says the president's calling for this collaboration, and this. And I've already given her the emails and the correspondence with both Jill Brennan and Higgins' office, and I said there was no legislative intent, and we're not mentioned in the law anyplace. She says, a decade ago, if Native people weren't mentioned in the law, it was assumed that it didn't apply. But the tide has changed. I said, no, I'm not talking about a law where we're not just mentioned in the conversation. I'm saying I talked to the legislators themselves, and they said we were not consulted. So they're telling me, the senator and the congressman are telling me there was no legislative intent. I asked the question, they confirmed what I suspected, so there was no legislative intent. This is a policy decision to go after our people. And we kind of hit loggerheads there, and then she suggested I meet with somebody else from the Treasury Department. Then when I tried to meet with that person from the Treasury Department, they said, you're not a tribal leader, are you? I said, no. They said, well, that executive order that calls for consultation and collaboration, that doesn't extend to you. I said, yeah, but I can have the meaningful conversation on this subject matter. They said, yeah, but I don't have to meet with you. I said, but this isn't about whether you have to. Don't you feel that you should? And they said, no. So that's kind of where it's left. Now, in the meantime, the treasurer of the Seneca Nation has had meetings with some of the folks in the Treasury Department. Not this person, who Jody Gillette specifically said to meet with, but in the conversation that he had with the Treasury Department, they said, look, you guys got three choices. You can either pay it, or you can bring in all your documents, which was, when they got the assessment letter, it says if you dispute this number, then bring all of your business records, and we can negotiate that number down for you. So we'll let you plead to a lesser crime, basically. So this Treasury Department guy says you can either pay it, or you can bring in documents and we can negotiate it down. He goes, or you can fight us. You can sue us. And then the conversation kind of hung further, and he says, and there's a fourth option. He says, you cannot pay it, and the chances are we'll never get to you anyway. We got enough, we got bigger fish to fry. So the fourth option is probably the reality. And, although some people are going to be concerned about bank accounts being seized and that kind of stuff. So the point is, if the Treasury Department is acknowledging that it's probably a waste of time for them to even chase on this thing, then why don't they just wipe it off the books? Why leave it hanging over everybody's head? And that's. But again, this is the reason that I do the show, is we got to have conversations. So I started this conversation, and people said, in fact, as I was walking out of the executive building right next to the White House with Jody Gillette, she says, there's 566 federally recognized tribes, and every one of them has 5 or a dozen of these same kind of issues. I said, no, they don't. I says, yeah, there's 566 federally recognized tribes, and you met with me. I says, and I know why you met with me, because you know that I'm right. This isn't a request for you to do something. This is a request for you to stop doing something. I'm not asking you to change your law, but just make sure that you understand that the law did not have this intent, that the agents are exceeding the legislative intent. I said, it's that simple. And that's what I say about all this stuff. I said, Jody, I could have talked to you about a dozen other issues. This is an easy one to go away. You guys should just make it go away. I said, and it would be a good first step. And that was the conversation that I had with her. But see, this is at the core of the problems that exist in Indian country. We have this, the same latent racism that allow the Washington Redskins and get ready to go down the Trail of Tears, comments from high schoolers. This kind of mentality, and when you listen to some of the stuff that gets said, the patronizing way that even Barack Obama, when he referring to Native people. I saw one of the, in fact, I don't know if it's in this paper, it might be in this one, it talked about Obama's overtures to our people. Again, our special month. I cited Murray Porter's song. Murray Porter did a song called "Is Sorry Enough," and it refers to Stephen Harper's Prime Minister of Canada, his apology for the residential schools. These are just words. If you're going to make a proclamation for our special month and not have a meaningful conversation about the real issues, and you're still going to refer to us as domestic dependent nations, or you're going to still refer to us as, when you're going to talk to us as if we're yours, when they make these comments like, well, our native brothers and sisters, like we're kept people, and that's the tone that exists in how we're referred to. The trust relationship. The trust relationship, it's not about a trust relationship. There were specific agreements that when millions of acres of land were given up, there were obligations that were supposed to be paid. Perpetual obligations, not just $4,500 worth of cloth. That's where the health and the welfare. When people do these assessments, and they do this a lot on the Canadian side, they'll talk about how many dollars per person is spent by Indian Affairs. They'll do the same thing on the American side. There's still less money paid per capita in Indian country. And when you consider the fact that both, and on the Canadian side, it's even more definitive because they established trust funds for all, that so many billions of dollars were put into, that it was supposed to fund a lot of this stuff. So it's not, and the trust funds were born out of mineral extraction, lands that were ceded, specific dollars. Well, it's the same thing here. So when people talk, there was a professor in Cornell, his name is Bob Venables. He used to say that Indians paid up. He said that they prepaid the tax. They prepaid it with their land. They prepaid it with their resources. I don't necessarily subscribe to that notion, but the idea was, we've done our part. Forget about the military service, forget all that other stuff. We gave up way too much for this experiment people call the democracy that is the United States. And it's not even acknowledged. Forget about appreciated. It's not even acknowledged. And then when you do get some sort of acknowledgement, there's always these strings attached to it. I cite the apology in '94 the joint resolution by the House and the Senate signed by Clinton relating to the unlawful toppling of the Kingdom of Hawaii. And what a travesty that whole thing, right from, not just from the military operation that it was, but right up to the whole process of statehood. The whole thing was fraud. And when the Native Hawaiians used that joint resolution and submitted that into court as part of their some of their claims, the Supreme Court said resolutions have no legal merit. They're not an admission of guilt. Wait a minute, it says we're sorry. It says all the stuff that you did that was wrong, and that's not it. The Supreme Court says no, that's not admissible. So these apologies don't even have that to it. They aren't even an admission of guilt. They're just words on a paper. They are meaningless. I mean, you've got Stephen Harper who will apologize for residential schools, and there's no way that you can interpret residential schools on that side or this side as anything but the very things that fit the definition of genocide. Mm-hmm. And yet they won't use those words. So you're afraid of those words? That's what's missing in this conversation. So we can have the President of the United States blow smoke up our ass, and it can be this one, it can be the next one, it could be the one before him, and it's been going on. It's been going on. That's why we have a word. The word we use for the President is Ranatagayas. People say that it means town destroyer. Paul Delaware was on my show last week, and he did a really good job explaining what Ranatagayas means. He said it's like a dog, like a rabid dog, that just keeps tearing at the flesh, and just keeps tearing, and it destroys everything it can destroy. It just keeps tearing and ripping at the flesh. That's what we referred to George Washington after the Sullivan campaigns, but that's why we kept referring to every president, because it wasn't just George Washington. Thomas Jefferson, the whole Louisiana Purchase thing, and where they bought Indian land from the French somehow, the whole idea was that we're going to send all the Indians, us included. It was every bit. We're going to shove all the Indians over west of the Mississippi. The Removal Act didn't start with Andrew Jackson. It started with Thomas Jefferson, at least as a formal policy. I mean, it was always the idea of removing us, but it starts with the enlightened one, Thomas Jefferson. So you can go through Jefferson, and you can go through every president, and every one of them just kept ripping at the flesh. John Kennedy, 10,000 acres of Seneca land, isn't that right, Agnes? Kinzo Dam. 10,000. And you know what? He was sorry. They got letters down in the museum. Down in the museum in Allegheny, you can see the letters where he's sorry. But you know what? He wouldn't have been president if he didn't go along with it. So his political aspirations were more important than screwing over the Senecas. And he knows it. He admits it. He admits it. It says as much in those letters. Because if you recall the numbers associated with his race against Nixon, it's kind of close. He wouldn't have won. He wouldn't have been the President of the United States if he hadn't. And you know what? The Army Corps of Engineers said they had 2 better options than the Kinzo Dam. They had 2 of them. That wasn't the best option. In fact, if you recall, since the building of Kinzo Dam, they still had some flooding issues in Pittsburgh. So it hasn't exactly been fully effective either. But we can go right through Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt, and I won't get the quote exactly right, but it was something to the effect, I would not subscribe to the notion that the only good Indian is a dead Indian. He says, but I would suggest that 9 out of 10 are. And I wouldn't want to look too closely at the 10th. So that's, and he won a Nobel Peace Prize. So let's be clear, but you know, so Theodore Roosevelt was a Nobel Peace Prize, and he could say something as racist as that. So, and again, governor of New York, became president because of some special day in Buffalo, as a matter of fact. That's how he got to be president. So we can go through, and I talked about Abraham Lincoln. We can go through every administration, and it's still that same dog ripping at the flesh, ripping at the land, and because it's not just ripping at the flesh. I mean, that Sullivan campaign was about destroying the food. It was about George Washington literally used the words in his orders to Sullivan, I want you to inflict terror on the Senecas.
A lot of people don't know what the Seneca or the Sullivan campaign was.
Sullivan campaign when the men were at Fort Niagara, he sent in John Sullivan to destroy Seneca villages. There were 35 Seneca villages, but it wasn't just Seneca villages. Onondaga, Cayuga villages, they were all destroyed. But primarily Onondaga and Senecas, because they were they had sided to some extent. And again, these were not decisions by the nations. There was no Seneca nation decree that they were on the side of the British. That's not the way it worked. That's the way history kind of tells it. There were Senecas that fought on the side of the British. There were Mohawks that fought on the side of the British. There were Oneidas that fought on the side of the Americans. But anyway. So the idea was to go through and not just defeat the Senecas. The whole idea was to destroy their lands, to destroy their fields, destroy their, don't even take prisoners. Then don't accept any pleas for surrender. They said, do not accept any of that stuff. We need to destroy them. They wanted generational destruction imposed upon the Senecas. They said, I want you to inflict terror upon the Senecas so they will know the level of their chastisement. So the first use of terrorism by the United States military, and I'm sorry, it is what it is. And then people say, geez, you always have all these negative things to say about American presidents, Well, sorry, it is what it is. I had a classmate of mine one time say, don't you have anything nice to say about any of them? Yeah, but that's already being said by people. I don't need to say those things. These are the things that people need to balance off. There needs to be balance. You need to understand that, that there's a downside to all of these individuals, and there's a dark side. And I'll tell you, we are still, the Obama administration, it's his Justice Department that are using anti-organized crime bills against our people. There's a couple of guys in the Mohawk territory now from the Longhouse, and the Longhouse decided that they wanted to create a funding mechanism, so they rented a building and they put some Class 2 machines in it. So it's like bingo, okay, Class 2 machines, and they called it Three Feathers Casino. The Longhouse did this. And of course the St. Regis tribe, cried foul, and and vendors got to be difficult to maintain the machines and stuff like that, so they shut it down. 3 months later, the feds come in and arrest those guys. The guys who sat on council in the Longhouse. The guys who sat on council. The one guy just got out last month. This happened in December of last year. He sat in jail for 11 months because the U.S. prosecutor said, we're setting his bail at $50,000, and we need to make sure that somebody can prove where that money comes from. So again, so it wasn't just that we couldn't show up there we couldn't pass the bucket around and get $50,000 and bail him out. No, we don't know that could be laundered money. That could be dirty money. Can't be cigarette money and can't be gaming money. So Tommy Square sat in jail for 11 months. One of the other guys, Turtle Clan, his daughter has leukemia, so he refused to turn himself in. He just hung on the Canadian side and still doing that to this day. So he's been wanted for 11 months. Well, two of the other guys did get arrested, and they were released on some. Finally. And this is Judge Thomas McAvoy. I know some of these judges. in the Northern District of New York, he presides, but also the Eastern District. He finally let Tommy out ROR. He said, I don't know why he was being held for 11 months. But see, that's the system, So, and these guys are being charged as if they're criminals. This is the Longhouse. One of the Longhouses, operating a Class 2 gaming facility to fund the Longhouse. It didn't even make any money. If anything, it lost money.
Was this any different than what any volunteer fire department does?
No, it was Class 2, except they're saying that it was an illegal gambling establishment. I don't know how that trial's going on today, during our special month. This is what happens, and so. That's the stuff. I mean, we've got a woman in Tonawanda who purchased Marlboro cigarettes without stamps on them from Oklahoma City, Kansas City, and they're charging her with purchasing unstamped cigarettes. We've been selling unstamped cigarettes for 35 years. That's what we do. We don't put stamps. We don't have state stamps. They said, well, but that violates the Contraband Cigarette Trafficking Act. Well, explain to me the Contraband Cigarette Trafficking Act. Well, here's the Contraband Cigarette Trafficking Act. The Contraband Cigarette Trafficking Act says that if a tobacco product, cigarettes, are found in a state that requires a stamp, but that they don't have a stamp on it, then that could be designated contraband. Yeah, but our territories, those stamps aren't required on our territories. But that's not what the way they're treating it. They're saying our territories are within the state. Every smoke shop in Tuscarora, Tonawanda, Allegheny, and Cattaraugus is filled with contraband then by that definition. But see, this was the purchase of Marlboros, and so they arrested Will Perry from Cattaraugus, and they came in, and now Wolf's Run, which is Will Perry's store. Now, let me back up. Tara's store, the store that Tara runs, is the Tonawanda Chief's store. It's the nation's enterprise. That's what she was running. So she wasn't buying this for herself. She actually was operating the Tonawanda Chief's store. So that's, again, just like the guys up on Akwesasne, that's now Will Perry, who was actually the trucker, they don't even have much on him buying it, but he has a trucking company. His Wolf's Run, where Will Perry's business is, sits between a place they call 11 acres, which is a residential area. So this kind of calm, peaceful residential area, and the property of the community center. So when the ATF came in with 20 agents with automatic weapons, putting his face in the dirt and holding guns to his head, line of sight was a residential area and the community center where our kids play. And in fact, there's some of the pictures on my Facebook group page. You see pictures of the agents, and they came in with ski masks on. They were actually, Ed Schindler says, "What's with the terrorist outfits?" They came in with ski masks while they're undercover. So you come in with guns and ski masks, and because some of you are flashing badges, others of you aren't, and they come in with automatic weapons and pistols drawn, and right in between our community center and our residential area. And again, no conversation, no permission, certainly. And the reality is, they didn't even need to do it. If they wanted to arrest them, they could have arrested them any place. They made a vulgar display, just like they did in Tonawanda when they went there the first time, just like when they went into Akwesasne on these guys. That's the Obama administration. Now, am I suggesting that within the course of Barack Obama's busy day, he's saying, let's do this now. Let's go after Akwesasne. No. But the fact of the matter is, you can't blow smoke up our ass and tell us how important we are, and how much you want to polish that covenant chain, and how much you respect Native people, and how much you plugged in language in VAWA, or how much you support the Indian Child Welfare Act as baby Teresa gets stripped away from her Cherokee dad. You can't say this stuff while your Justice Department and your alcohol, tobacco, and firearms people are putting guns to our people's heads. That's not a conversation. And that's what I'm saying. If there's something in our trade that is particularly bothersome to the President of the United States, then let's have a conversation. Don't send Steve Dickey, who is their ATF agent, who's an absolute moron, and who thinks he's so full of himself. We don't need to talk to that guy. Let's have a conversation. We can talk with your justice. And you know what? And we have people. I'll talk to them. Ross, John, there are some really good people within the Seneca Nation that could have. I'm not saying the elected guys are the best ones to even have the conversation. But there are people, and I'll tell you, Onondaga is being cited with tax bills from the IRS. The Tonawanda Chiefs are being cited with tax bills from the IRS. They're being cited with floor tax bills. They're being so all of this stuff. Nobody's immune. It's not like you're saying, okay, well, the attritional guys, they're nice guys, we'll leave them alone. We're going to go after these guys. We're going to go after the ones who have a private sector. They're going after everybody. But again, that's why I do what I do, is so we can have the conversation. That's why I do the show. Now, and again, the show that I do is, I'm not on the Seneca Nation's radio station. I got to tell you a little bit of a funny story, because I saw a picture today on Facebook, and it had this woman, her name was Busty Hart or something like that. She's got triple D's, and she runs a strip joint just over the Pennsylvania line. she advertises on WGWE for her strip joint. And it's a funny thing is I was in the president's office when the chief of staff for Barry Snyder, Mo John, calls up Smitty at WGWE and said, "Hey, what would it take to get John Kane's show on WGWE?" And he goes, "Oh, we can't have him. He's too controversial." You can have a stripper in your studio and pictures posted online and everything else and advertise strip joints, and yet John Kane's show is too controversial. But anyway, that's the long and the short. So I'm too controversial for WGWE. So I purchase time. I'm on a commercial radio station. I'm not. And I'll tell you, WVFO, they don't give us any time. I'll take it back. Tomorrow morning I'm going to do an interview with Eileen Buckley on WVFO. But I've told them, I said, look, you guys don't do any native programming. You guys miss, and I hate to rub it in, but there's some Indians with money around here too. I mean, there's a couple of casinos here. You can probably get some good underwriting. In fact, you're probably getting a little of it. Why don't you give something back? WBFO covers Ontario, all the way up to Toronto, all of Western New York. You've got Tuscaroras, Tonawondas, Senecas, Six Nations, New Credit, all of these areas.
Is that 88.7?
Yeah. Well, they're on several other frequencies as well. HD too. And yet they won't provide any native programming. And to the extent that NPR will do a story every once in a while. That's NPR, that's not WFO. They do nothing. And nor does NED or any the TV station or anything else. And so the point is, I mean, Aggie, she works as much as she can to do a show once but it's not even once a month.
Quarter.
It's like every month with what?
4 times a year.
Yeah, 4 times a year.
Well, we got it on BLK now, so.
Yeah, so
that's WB.
I have to pay $700 a week. I pay $700 a week to be on the radio. That's what it costs. I mean, it's almost $9,000 a quarter. And so I do this. I run around with a basket and I go to different territories, and luckily people have stepped up. But the thing that I ask for more than even the cash from anybody is participation. I mean, join my group page. If you're on Facebook, join my group page. If you're not on it already, and if you are on it, participate. Have a conversation. Offer a commentary. Offer a thought, a suggestion, a criticism. My whole point is, this is the conversation that needs to be had. And the show and the articles that the column that I write every week is the opportunity to have that conversation. I'm not going to be a huge commercial success. That's not what I'm going for. I'm going for creating a forum that enough of us can have a conversation with. I get out there. In fact, I'll tell you. Last week I had Al Jazeera America. No, I'm sorry. I had Al Jazeera Arabic come out to. They came to Buffalo from DC. They spent 12 hours with me last Sunday. They shot. They went to Cattaraugus and took some pictures. I got Brad John, who was a former counselor and treasurer of the Seneca Nation. He gave an interview. A young woman by the name of Whitney Brooks gave an interview. Ross was on. Matt Hill was on. They actually filmed my show as well. In fact, they weren't totally happy with the video they got of the show, so they're sending another crew again this Sunday. So this Sunday again, if you listen to the show, I'll probably make some references again to Al Jazeera. Now, this is Al Jazeera Arabic. 50 million viewers in the Arab world. Al Jazeera International, or Al Jazeera Media Network, is 260 million viewers in 130 countries. Now, Al Jazeera America, which is kind of overcoming a lot of racism, Time Warner dropped them immediately. They've got about 4 million viewers in Al Jazeera America, and it's coming along. It's a good network. I encourage people to listen to it. They can be a little soft. In fact, I've Al Jazeera International and Al Jazeera Arabic and Al Jazeera English International. They're much more aggressive. Al Jazeera America is trying to play it nice and almost too nice, and I've given some of their folks a little bit of grief on. If you're not gonna cover native issues, they did a bit on Johnny Depp playing Tonto, and it was terrible. And I told the woman who produced the show, I said, yeah, it was pretty terrible. If you want to talk about that issue, and if you want to talk about the Washington Redskins, don't talk to somebody who wants to just talk about Ray Hallbritter, who is spending thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars to champion the Washington Redskins issue. He talks about the Washington Redskins. He doesn't talk about the racism. He doesn't talk about, I mean, he says, oh yeah, that name is bad, it affects our children. He's done that, but he literally, his radio campaign said, we just want to be treated for what we really are, Americans. That's his radio message. Yeah, I mean, and it's, I heard this thing, I was like, no we don't. That's not, I'm fighting for distinction and autonomy. I'm not fighting for my American civil rights. That's not, that's not what I'm fighting for. And that's what gets missed in this. He's got some Washington, D.C. PR firm writing his script. I had a conversation with his editor. Oneida's own Indian Country Today media network. It's not even a magazine anymore. It's just a website now. But Ray Cook is their editor. He's from Akwesasne. We don't get along very well, but he does follow some of what I've been writing and some of what I do. So I did a story on the, for lack of a better word, my story of the Redskins says, change the name or end the genocide. That was the name of my article, and you can find it online. And what I said is, don't you dare change that name and say, and feel like you've checked a box. Don't think that you checked the box and say, there, we did something for you. Now go away. Because if you think changing the name of the Washington Redskins solves any of our issues, then you're safe in your racist delusion. That's what I said in my column. And so Ray Cook read that, and so he messaged back, and he goes, John, we can't change genocide overnight. We got to take small steps. And I said, you know what, Ray? I'm going to take small steps, but I'm going to take my small steps in the deep end of the pool. You guys can wallow in the shallow end if you want. and he says, I understand, and I said, I'm fighting the assimilation that is embodied by the statement, by Halbert's statement about wanting to be treated like an American. He goes, yeah, I know, Franklin Keel, who's the head of NCAI, which is National Congress of American Indians, yeah, he says that kind of stuff too. It drives me nuts. I don't think Ray meant that. I think he meant treat you like a human being. I says, no, he didn't. He paid good money for those words that those white people had drafted up for him to say, because he could say it with a lapel pin with a little flag and that kind of stuff. I says, he paid good money for that script, and it's said over and over again on his radio campaign. I said, he knew what he was saying. I said, and that's the problem, because he bought his way into that conversation. You can't pull up online anything about the Redskins without seeing Ray Halberter's face on there. Now, he's brought attention to the issue, but it's because he's it's a publicity stunt for him. There's no sense of talking about the Washington Redskins or the Lancaster Redskins or the, get ready to go on the Trail of Tears 2, Indians, don't have that conversation if you're not going to talk about what's wrong with it. What's wrong with it is the racism, the fact that we're treated as if we're not here. And that American policy supports that. Frankly, I like the idea that I can go to Washington and give hell to Jody Gillette or Barack Obama or anybody else and say, you know what? Your policies are so skewed in this country. Your view of us is so marginalizing that the name of your football team is a derogatory word for us. I like having that there. Keep it there. Keep calling us Redskins. But you know what? If you're going to use a racist name, don't get offended when I call you a racist. I mean, the crazy part is you get these white people who get pissed off because you call them a racist because they're doing something that's racist. They're more offended by us referring to the word Redskins as a racist term than we are offended by the racist term itself. Honestly, I mean, and if you followed any of the debate on the Lancaster Redskins, these guys were, oh, that's our tradition. We've been the Redskins for 60 years. Oh, really?
Yeah.
Have you? I mean, that's the mentality. That's the stuff that is said. But the point is, that's why we can have federal agents come onto our territory, because we're treated with such disregard. I mean, there is back in '97 when the state police, and let's be clear, there wasn't tire fires lit on the thruway that caused the problem. Most of the fires, anything that happened on the thruway happened after the state police had beat up even women on Cattaraugus. In Onondaga, there was 90 people, over 90, about 100 people that were at they had set up a fire along 81 in 97. Part of what they were protesting wasn't just what the state was doing, but Onondaga was trying to take over the tobacco trade. They had already made a deal with the state. So the Onondagas were also opposed to what the Onondaga people were opposed to what the Onondaga chiefs were doing. A bunch of people were there. Ross John and his wife was there. There was a bunch of people from here that were there. People from all over. Esther Sundown from Tonawanda was there. You know Esther. Murray Peters was there. Some of these are very respected people all over, right? There was, there were people women in their 80s that were there, and there were pregnant girls there. I mean, this was a family. This wasn't a protest. This was a tobacco burning. They're doing a bit of a ceremony. All of a sudden, and some of the guys did go over close to 81, and there was construction going on. So the traffic was like crawling through there. So there were people that were handing out pamphlets. Then all of a sudden, there was no more traffic. People went out there, and look, there's nothing. All of a sudden, there's nothing. They looked up the northbound lane, and there were state troopers coming down. So they showed up, all in riot gear, and they beat the crap out of everybody. And they arrested like 40 people. Stefan Mahailu, who is the Erie County Comptroller, he was a bit of a radio news person here. He's a Republican newscaster. He is the Erie County Comptroller. He was the reporter there that day in Onondaga, and he got pushed around. His cameraman got knocked around too, and so he was there. I talked to him about it one time when I was doing Two Sides, and so that issue happened 17 years ago. Today, the state is still trying to settle. Those charges all got dropped, and the people sued. And there's 93 people that sued the state of New York. The state of New York started to pay them off with $3 million. Even Ross and Holly, they're offered like $8 grand a piece for having their civil rights violated. Paul Delarone and some of the guys who were arrested, they got offered anywhere from $40,000 to $60,000 for being falsely arrested. And the people who were beaten got offered anywhere from $60,000 to $200,000 based on the severity of the assault that they went through. The problem is, those people who weren't suing for money. They were suing for information. They were suing for damages. But they also wanted to know how the protocol was established, who called them in, because they know some of the Onondaga chiefs were involved. So they wanted names named, and they said, well, we're not going to name names. Well, why not? Why don't you establish what the protocol was? That's essentially your defense, and so they won't do that. So none of those 93 are willing to sign off, and some of those people could really use the money. So none of those people will sign off on it until, and so they had a meeting just 2 weeks ago, in Syracuse. They almost, not all 93 are still alive, but most of them were there. And the judge, who was a judge originally, now he's serving as an arbitrator, and the lawyers were scolding all the Native people, saying, what's the matter with you people? This is the best deal you're going to get. You're not going to get justice in our system. It's the judge and the lawyers are saying you're not going to get justice. What are you calling this then? What are you calling this? Is no, take the money. And of course, take the money, they also wanted you to sign a non-disclosure that you won't talk about it.
Right.
And you won't ever sue anybody again over this issue, if the name should ever come up. So they want to buy their silence for $3 million. The irony is, again, this is going on from 1997, and the state's admitting fault because they're trying to pay him off, but they want a non-disclosure on the issue, and again the people want names. They don't want. It's not just about trying to crucify a couple of Onondaga chiefs. This is about the protocol established by the state police, and if it did go all the way up to George Pataki at the time, they want to establish who at some point said it was okay to beat our people when there was nothing. They weren't doing anything violent. There was no blocking of the highway or nothing like that. So that's what's not being established here. And I think Ross was at this meeting, and Ross is pretty outspoken in Seneca territory, but even there in Onondaga, when they are in Syracuse, I should say, when this meeting, he stood up and he gave the lawyers who were essentially scolding the Native people there, said, what the hell's the matter with you people? You're telling us that your system doesn't work for us. Then stop trying to force us in the system all the time. And he says, you know what? But you know what? If we do have to go to trial, and we don't care if we lose or not. That's not the point. The point is that you guys did something wrong to us. And they even got some of the officers to finally admit, like several years later, that the reason they didn't have name tags on was because they were trying to avoid personal liability. They were told to take the name tag. At first, the story was, well, we took them off because those name tags are sharp. Then there's like a pin, somebody could have got pulled by it. They literally tried to say that, right? They honestly did. Then finally they got them to admit that no, it was about personal liability.
Guy who beat Nate up didn't have his name tag on.
Yeah, of course not. But I mean, but again, you know, this is why the conversation has to happen. And you know, that's why I appreciate what Aggie does. I actually had a chance to do a couple of shows with Aggie, both radio and we did a couple of TV shows.
On Discovery.
Right, and I've been doing something with this Anna Marie Sinatra. She does Health Focus. I'm probably going to do her show once a month or so. So I know there's people who say, you know what, this is a little, you know, too much John Kane. Isn't there somebody else to talk to? And I'm saying, yeah, let there be somebody else to talk to. And in fact, come on my show. The more people are on there, the less I have to do. And you know, there are other voices out there, but we need to insist that WBFO, and you know, I can call Christy Mazurek and pretty much do her show anytime I want. So when I tell people, look, we're not being shut out of the media completely. We may not be getting shows, but as far as appearing on shows, we can. But we have to be willing to do it. And you know, but we got to make sure we have a message. You know, the worst thing is to get an opportunity to go on a television show program or a news program and then give a one-word answer. And you know, that whole stoic thing only goes so far. It doesn't work if you're trying to communicate. If there's this myth that we're just stoic, no, we were statesmen. Our ability was statesmanship. It was diplomacy. That's that's why Senecas are. You know, that's why Senecas are called Senecas. You ever wonder why Senecas are called Senecas? I mean, the word is Onondaga. Why would you call a people? Why would you use a word? Where does the word come from? You know where the word comes from? A Roman orator, Seneca the Younger. Look it up. He was a philosopher. And what happened is, Senecas had such powerful diplomats, and the people said, you know, they're like Seneca, and the name stuck. They were referring to a Roman orator. I don't know how these names stuck. I mean, Mohawk. You know, Mohawk is something between the Dutch and the Hurons that is supposed to mean like flesh eater or something. How does that word stick? And now, if you look at Mohawk, you go online and look up Mohawk. You know what you're gonna get? Pages of haircuts. I don't know what. So I mean, at some point, people need to become a little more familiar when we say Ganyangahaga. I mean Mohawk. When we say Onondaga, I mean Seneca. But no, I think there's something to be said for the fact that the word Seneca managed to stick with the Onondaga, and it's because they were statesmen, because they were skilled at that. That skill has to be redeveloped, but not only that has to be redeveloped and rekindled, it's got to be respected. You know what I said about, you know, when Obama did his proclamation for National Native American Heritage Month, and on the bottom of the proclamation it says, "I call upon all Americans to participate in programs and activities that honor Native Americans." And I said, you know what? How about you just respect us? At least for the month. You know, I mean, when you read the proclamation, it says, and I designate November 29th as National Honor or Native American Heritage Day. And I said, wait a minute, that's Black Friday. I said, what are you going to do, honor us by trembling each other at Walmart? You know?
Suppose I can get your leg grab anymore.
And you're going to honor me, give me that 65-inch flat screen that they have there. As I joked about it in one of the columns that I had written. But no, I mean, there needs to be a better dialogue about what it means to honor somebody and respect somebody, because saying the words, you know, it's like Murray Porter in his song about when is sorry enough. The second line after he says "is sorry enough" is, it's not what you say, it's what you do. It's bottom line, it's not what you say, it's what you do.